Hello and welcome to another I Measure You research review. I'm really fortunate this week to be joined by Jenny Strickler from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Jenny, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dan. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Thank you for joining me. We'll dive straight in. So if you don't mind telling the viewers a little bit more about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Jenny Strickler, that's going to be my married name. I did start my PhD and have continued to publish under my maiden name, which is Jenny Russell. But I'm currently a performance scientist with the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm finishing my PhD through the University of Technology, Sydney, which is focused on quantifying the physical demands of the NBA. My background before starting kind of in a sports science realm was athletic training. I spent about 6 years working as an athletic trainer at the Division I NCAA level. About 5.5 years ago, I moved to Oklahoma to begin my PhD, started an internship with the Oklahoma City Thunder, which has evolved into my current role as a performance scientist. So currently I work in that role along with a collaborative multidisciplinary staff. My job is to help collect, analyze, and report on any physical performance related data that helps kind of enhance our daily workflow and the health and performance of our players.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And I guess one of the main reasons I wanted to speak to you today, Jenny, was about your recent publication. So your systematic review into the practices of measuring the physical demands in basketball. So it'd be great to dive into that, if that's okay, and talk a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah. So, starting my PhD I kind of have an all-star cast of supervisors. Aaron Coots, Blake McLean, and then Franco and Pellizzeri are the supervisors for my PhD. So they've obviously done a great job in just, pushing me towards a route where a main goal of the dissertation or the thesis is to have a publication-worthy systematic review. So that was always a goal. We registered the review through Prospero, and going through the process of really thinking out the approach to the problem was a huge learning curve for me. I had read the research before, but in terms of really getting into like the systematic process, that was very eye-opening and a huge emphasis of development. And I feel very fortunate to have had the support that I did to do that. When we started looking at the basketball literature, there are already some really great reviews out there in basketball. So when we originally set out to start this review, we had two objectives that we thought would complement some of those other reviews, as well as kind of help move basketball research forward in a positive way. So the original scope included those two objectives, which one, identify the methods and technology used to monitor physical demands of basketball. And then the second one was to assess the validity and the reliability of external load monitoring methods and technologies. So again, the secondary aim was there to kind of set us apart from other basketball reviews that had been recently published. But what we found as we started to get into it is that the basketball literature really started to be published at a very high clip in about 2017, 2018. So there were a lot more articles available for us when we started our review that hadn't been included in previous reviews. Additionally, it was pretty difficult to, from a kind of a search term perspective, to pinpoint the validation of some of the newer technologies in basketball. Again, we were trying to trace those all the way back to lab testing, and it was really difficult to do that in a systematic way. So we kind of just stuck with that process one, or that aim one, which was to identify those methods and technologies used to monitor physical demands of basketball. And that kind of led us to our current review, which again, we recognize that while a lot of people had done a great job in reporting what other papers in basketball had done, there were quite a few methodological inconsistencies that we had started to identify through reading the papers that we thought needed just a little bit more attention drawn to those. So that's kind of how we formed our ultimate review.
No, fantastic. And I'll dive into some of my questions in just a moment. But just to touch first upon the balance of of research as a PhD student and obviously full-time role with an MBA team. I mean, how do you go about balancing that? Obviously, you're a very busy lady on the day-to-day. How much of a challenge was that?
You know, it was a challenge. Again, there are pros and cons again of everything, and so finding the time is just a matter of, you know, having a great support staff, which I do. The staff of the Thunder understands, you know, my goals in terms of getting a PhD. They understand the academic requirements that I have, and they're very supportive. Having kind of a personal life that lends itself to, again, a support staff that understands I need some of that time for academic work, even when I get home from work. But the pros are, being in this environment helps shape some of those questions. They help shape some of the work because we're in an environment that, you know, lends itself to asking a lot of questions. It gives us a lot of data that we can dive into in a very intimate way. So again, there's not so much of a balance right now. It's not really a work-life balance. It's just kind of work and PhD, and then life will come later, I guess. But again, I feel really fortunate to be in this environment because I think it helps provide a lot of context, you know, even reading through the research, understanding how that would or wouldn't apply in our environment, and then trying to produce research that will help other practitioners in you know, a very practical way is kind of my goal. So.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, your review it's a big paper in itself, and you mentioned there's a lot of literature out there, but you also allude to the fact that there is currently a lack of alignment between applied practice and methodological frameworks, and ultimately a lack of detailed understanding of technology in basketball. So why do you think that is, and what do you think needs to change?
Yeah, so I think to speak, you know, to the first part, the lack of alignment just between the methodological frameworks and then, you know, understanding the technologies. I think basketball is a little bit behind some other sports just in terms of the applied research. You know, there's a lot of information out there in individual sports such as track and field and swimming, and then some team sports have a lot more sports science kind of historically behind them, such as Australian football and rugby, soccer. So I think one issue in basketball is we're trying to catch up, and in doing that, we're trying to adopt a lot of the things, both methods and technologies that have been used in other sports. And when it comes to kind of quantifying and measuring the physical load, in some cases that just doesn't, you know, what other sports have done isn't going to apply to basketball. It's just different enough. You know, it's kind of like fitting a square peg in a round hole. So those unique attributes require kind of unique solutions, and we're still young from an applied research perspective. So I think that speaks a little bit to the disconnect. In terms of what needs to change, I think we're definitely on the right path. You know, a lot of the research coming out in basketball is very rich. It's very thought-provoking, and you know, considers a lot of the context. We need to consider or continue kind of critically thinking about the solutions that we're applying in this space, and how those solutions need to be specifically catered to the sport and the athletes, and in some cases, you know, the league and the environment in which the basketball is being played. So we need to be okay with breaking down the methods and questioning them in the context of basketball, I think, to move forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just on a bit of a tangent from the paper itself, you mentioned there that basketball may be a little bit behind other sports, your typical single sports or your European games, so rugby league, rugby union, soccer. In those sports, and I'm particularly thinking rugby league and rugby union, particularly in the UK, there's a lot of collaboration between your individual teams and the national governing bodies. Is that something that is also happening in the NBA, or is it very much each franchise is an individual silo, and there's more kind of secrecy around what technology you're using, what practices you're using, etc.?
Yeah, I think you know, the league, the NBA has a desire to kind of be a little bit more collaborative, but that's really difficult when you have individual owners, and it's still kind of misunderstood that a lot of, whether or not some of this performance science data is a huge competitive advantage. Certainly everyone would like to think so, but when you're dealing with competitive advantages, that certainly restricts some of the collaboration that you would see between teams. And so I would say at this point, there's not quite as much collaboration as in other team sports, as you mentioned. But I hope, and this is very optimistic, but I hope that is kind of a goal. And again, I think the league is trying to put policies in place that would allow for kind of consistent monitoring. They do understand in some regards the importance of this information for kind of a health related perspective. And it's just that, the performance and the competitive advantage piece that I think keeps some people in silos, but hopefully the goal is to move away from that and do the best thing for the players and the teams. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, going back to the review itself, you provided guidelines on the application of duration measurement methodologies in particular, and you even gave advice on the vetting processes and procedures for validity and reliability. Is that an approach, that you use directly at OKC? Has that been kind of a result of your research?
Yeah, certainly in my time here, those processes have evolved, but we do have processes in place to kind of holistically vet technology, both from a reliability and validity context, but also just trying to understand how it would work within our environment with our players. And again, understanding just the demands of the sport is, okay, would it work with travel? Will it work long-term? Is it helping us with both short-term and long-term goals? So it's certainly, like I mentioned, a holistic approach to our technology vetting. We believe, we do use a lot of the methodologies that we suggest in the review. Again, there's quite a few, so we don't use all of them, but we believe we have the processes in place here to help achieve our end goals, which we've spent a lot of time in identifying. Some of those include what are the most intense periods of play for the NBA, but also what are the true volume demands of these players throughout the course of the season. So again, our processes and our methodologies are there to kind of meet those goals, but we certainly expect as our goals change, so would our methods.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just to touch on the technologies that you actually use, if you don't mind. Obviously, basketball is a little bit different from other outdoor sports. Let's say there's a wide use of GPS technologies, which of course isn't necessarily possible for basketball being an indoor sport. What technologies do you deem most valuable for basketball, and what do you guys use at the moment to kind of track performance and I guess health of your players, if you don't mind just diving into that?
Yeah, so the league contracts an optical tracking company, Second Spectrum. So they'll collect all the data in games. So we are getting some of that information for games. For practices, we do use wearables. And I think in terms of the future of technology in basketball, I think the future should be with more of the inertial measurement units as opposed to the positioning systems, just based on the demands of the sport, the work that we've done so far. And, I think Lorena Torres on the Pacey Performance podcast kind of summed it up the best that I've heard so far. But just speaking about the differences, with IMUs, you'll get some 3D information versus positional information. You're just kind of stuck with the 2D. And the importance of understanding some of those micro movements in basketball is really what we've found to be kind of the future. In addition to that, Dan, I think companies can have really great hardware, but if they don't have the software to go along with that, and again, we talk our methodological approaches have a lot to do with how do you measure duration. And if you don't have the software that can allow you to, capture that information in a really rich and detailed way, it doesn't really matter how great the hardware is or how great the systems are. You need to be able to have information that's translatable to your end goals, to what you're trying to understand. So I think it has to be kind of a pair of both of those things in terms of the technological advancements and the future. So not to be a shameless pitch for IMU, but you guys certainly, or I measure you, but you guys certainly have done a great job in that, advancing both the hardware and the software. I think, having wearable information that can give you limb to limb differences, or can, is getting a little bit more creative in terms of how it's worn. So textiles, for example, I've seen a lot of work go into that. Can we incorporate these units into the clothes that they're wearing? I think that's a pretty interesting future to think about. But
it's certainly a fast moving industry. And you mentioned Lorena's episode with Rob Pacey on the Pacey Performance podcast, and I think one of the points that she raised about technology and providers of technology is the collaboration and the relationship between the clubs and the technology providers. How important do you think that is in your perspective? Is it important that you're dealing with providers that listen to your feedback and they can manipulate the technology to suit your needs or the needs of a specific sport?
Yes, and I want to first acknowledge, I know how difficult it must be to have multiple clients across multiple sports and try to give every single person what they need. I used to teach, and I know it's impossible to give every single student exactly what they need. But if you're working with someone that isn't in it necessarily to, if they're in it more for the capitalist gain, or they're not really interested in promoting research, in sharing information, in collaborating, whether that's with the end user or just with other companies that are trying to make sure that this is valid and reliable technology, I think that's pretty dangerous. So yeah, I would say I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's certainly something that goes into our decisions when we are looking at technology. What do other practitioners say about this company? What's their reputation, out in the field? Do they work with people, or are they new? Are they interested in learning? Are they interested in sharing information with us about the work that they've done, with their technology to date? So those are certainly things we take into consideration.
Yeah, good stuff. And we've touched on the future of technology in basketball, and maybe a shift to use of inertial measurement units more generally. But in terms of future research, what would you like to see? And then as a secondary question to that, what does future research for you look like?
Yeah, I'd like to see, I think, more independent research being done regarding some of the validation of wearables. Again, this is something as simple as, how does the placement affect the information? Can we have some independent research on that? How does how it's worn? Again, if we're going into textiles versus straps versus vests, how do those kinds of things affect the information as well? Are they interchangeable, or is that something that we need to make sure we're controlling for as we, promote this to our players or kind of move through different technologies? For me, my next kind of projects after the PhD, I will finish that first, is just working through some of the historical data that we have here at the Thunder. Again, I think this organization has done a great job, even since the beginning, which they're very young, but in identifying how data can be important for understanding, both past successes as well as kind of informing future, hopefully, successes. So I think working through some of that, making sure that our current processes are consistent with our end goals for both the player and the organizational vision. And again, yeah, hopefully there's other things that come up that you can't even anticipate. But
that's fantastic. Well, that's all about time for that's all we have time for. So thank you again for joining me, Jenny. I will share your paper. So for those guys that are listening in, please do check the systematic review out. And Jenny, if any of our listeners do want to reach out to you direct, whether it be about that paper in particular, or working in elite sport for any kind of advice and guidance, is there a best means to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'll provide you with my email address, and please feel free to share that. That certainly would probably be better than LinkedIn or ResearchGate, because I try to check those a lot, but email's the best. So
perfect. Well, thanks again for your time. Happy New Year, and good luck for the rest of the season. And to all of those listening in, thank you for joining us, and I'll see you again soon.
All right, thanks, Dan.